Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at Facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. Maybe that'll inspire Apple to promote us a little. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSpod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. Okay, I said last week that the guest list episode was the final one of 2017, and I sort of lied. But this isn't really a Virtual Memories podcast. That is, there's no conversation with a guest this time, just me talking to myself. So if you want to turn it off and delete this one, feel free. You're not going to miss out on a great conversation unless you consider me talking to me worthwhile. But you're not going to hear anybody else. Since it's not really an episode, this one doesn't count as number 250, which I'm still planning to post January 2nd with a surprise guest. So what am I doing here? It's Christmas Day, evening now. I am at home by myself for Christmas for the first time since 2003. The holiday doesn't mean anything to me. I'm Jewish. But for the last 13 years, my wife and I have been together, since 2005, visiting her family in Louisiana. 2004, she got sick and couldn't go, but we were together for that Christmas weekend, I guess. This time around, our dog has some health issues. Not life-threatening, but we can't leave him with our dog sitter, so I stayed in New Jersey this year. It's a little weird, breaking a tradition that she and I have shared for such a long time. To be honest, I was kind of expecting to go all Jack Torrance after 2 or 3 days on my own, but we're in day 4 at this point, and this is really the only talking to myself that's going on. I am flat out surprised, frankly, that I haven't drifted into solipsism. I've been trying to write a little. I also caught up on some TV consumption, and I've been out walking Benny and bumping into neighbors outside and talking to them, and weirdly, that's been enough to keep me from going off the rails. As far as that TV consumption goes, just because this is something people seem to care about, I knocked out the last 6 episodes of the new season of Mr. Robot, which convinced me to quit that show. All plot, no character, kind of lost the thread. Had promise, just got too involved in trying to tell its own story, and whatever, I don't need to tell you anymore. I also binged my way through Errol Morris's new semi-documentary series, Wormwood, which was absolutely fantastic, and I now have to work on getting Mr. Morris on the show sometime, which could be particularly interesting because he interviews people. That's how he makes the documentaries he does. He also does a lot more, but he's someone who's used to asking the questions. So I'm very interested in seeing if I can get him to sit down with me. Also, at my brother's behest, I watched that 2016 X-Men flick, Logan, last night. Supposed to be the last Wolverine story, and there were some nice moments between Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart, and the relationship of the Wolverine character with this girl who's supposed to be his daughter. But but it's just replete with like cartoony hyper-violence and just people getting killed everywhere. And that's not my thing nowadays. I mean, even when it's like a Tarantino thing, there's a reason people are dying. Here they're just video game fodder a lot. And that's it's not cool to me. Other people, that's fine, whatever your thing is. Also, as a sidebar, that movie sort of seemed like a repudiation of NAFTA, given that it's about these unregulated goods being made in Mexico, in this case, secret mutant children, and the need to smuggle them through America up into Canada. Maybe I'm reading too much into things, but, it did seem kind of weird in the age of Trump. Anyway, the upshot is Amy's going to be home tomorrow morning, so all of this can kind of wash away. But while we're doing a year-end episode, I should tell you that 2017 was a very good year for the Virtual Memories show. I didn't miss a week in terms of producing the show, even this week, which we don't really count. And we had the most downloads ever in the history of the show. The pace has slowed down a little in the last few months because there's been some changes to the algorithms by which they calculate downloads. And I only partly take it as a personal affront, which, again, is a sign of progress. There are a couple of parties I want to thank for the success of the show by my lights. First and foremost, I could not do this without the guests who give me their time, who let some weird guy from New Jersey into their homes or offices to sit down for an hour or so and talk to them about their lives and their work. Thank you, everybody who's ever appeared on the show. Of course, there are the listeners who tune in regularly, even the ones who just listen for a single show because they want to hear that particular guest. When you get down to it, I barely know any of you, but I'm so glad you're out there. Then there are the patrons and supporters on Patreon and PayPal. I mentioned that stuff at the top of the episode. I'm going to mention it at the end, too. These are the people who kick in some money to help out with the costs of making the show. I know I do okay at my day job, but every time I go into the city, it's another $10 at the bridge, another $30 to park, another $6 or so for the subway. It adds up. So I'm glad. I appreciate every penny. And I'm also cooking up a nice gift for all of you in 2018. Lastly, there's my wife who puts up with all this. The time I spend away from the house on weekends or evenings to record, the Saturday or Sunday mornings when I'm editing this week's episode downstairs, keeping our dog quiet, also when I'm recording intros. She puts up with the Monday evenings when I do the final coding for the webpage and the other platforms, because some of it I can't post until the episode goes live for various workflow reasons. She listens to me prattle on about guests and potential bookings and new books and all that stuff. But it's not just the putting up with stuff that I want to thank her for. It's the positive support and the love. That gives me the freedom to do this, to have something outside of work, outside of, to call it a personal life, outside of, basically the show is a third place for me. This is the place where I get to make art. I was going to write this weekend a lot more, and this is what I'm doing instead. Anyway, thank you, my love. But all of that is not why I'm doing this right now. I'm here on Christmas evening because of something I read over the weekend. The linguist Oliver Cam wrote a column in the Times of London on Saturday, published on Saturday, about the role that the Franco-Belgian comic books Asterix the Gaul played in his career. His mother, Anthea Bell, was the translator of the Asterix comics, and Oliver writes all about the importance of language and what the comics did for him, and a great Latin pun that his mother put in an early strip that took him years to get. But he also wrote, "My mother fell ill a year ago and entered a nursing home. Her great mind has now departed, and she no longer knows who I am. She has the Times delivered to her bedside daily, but has no understanding of why she requested it, or that some words in it are mine. I'm not downcast. Though her career is over, she remains a literary giant, and no one has taught me more about language and languages. I was shattered to read that. I recorded with Anthea Bell in February of 2015, and I remember marveling over how sharp and commanding she was at 79 years old, a few years older than my parents. And less than 3 years later, it's all gone. I don't want to say it's funny, but the funny thing is that Anthea was a late addition to this 48-hour trip to England that I was doing. I was going over there to record with Clive James, who has been, we'll say, dying from lymphoma and emphysema for a whole bunch of years now. And I flew out for my one chance at recording with him at his home in Cambridge, as well as a session with his wife, Prue Shaw, who lives in town. And while I was looking over the great spreadsheet that knows all, I saw Anthea's name in my special Stefan Zweig super episode section. Don't ask. This is who you're listening to. And there was a note that she lived in Cambridge. So I emailed her my pitch, and this is after Clive and Prue had already consented to record, and I was going to head out there. And I explained the Clive James aspect of the trip, and she told me she was up for recording. And she also wrote, "You were right, sadly, about seizing the opportunity to interview Clive James. I remember my son, who is a journalist on the Times here in the UK, going to the States to record an interview with his friend Christopher Hitchins, knowing he was almost certainly seeing him for the last time." Now, through the miracles of modern medicine, including a drug manufactured by one of the companies I represent in my day job, Clive James is still alive and kicking. But Anthea's all but gone. So the reason I'm doing this is to tell you why I'm doing this. I know there's no material reward to making this podcast every week. I know I'm not going to be discovered and offered some mythical high-paying interview job with writers and artists. I know, well, until a couple of months ago, it meant something different to say, I know I'm not going to be the next Charlie Rose, but you know what I mean. I do this to catch a little bit of the spark that makes people's lives special. And I like older guests because, well, partly because they've been around long enough. They see the patterns and what really matters in their lives and their art and how their occupation has changed, how politics have kept cycling or on a pendulum back and forth. They see the bigger picture sometimes. But part of the reason I like older guests is because they're going to be gone before you know it. And this is why I flew out to Columbus one weekend to record with D.G. Myers. I mean, he was dying of prostate cancer. I've told this story before. He was dying of prostate cancer. He thought he had 18 to 24 months left. And he had 6, as it turned out. And I got to sit down with him and spend an hour or two on a Sunday getting a little bit of his life. I mean, I have a lot of regrets about this. I regret not pushing David Carr after our initial communication. He died of lung cancer 2 years after I first reached out to him. At the time, back then, he said, or emailed, I'm jammed for the next 2 months. Let's reconnect in April. And I prodded once or twice, lightly, not enough. He was younger than Anthea. He was, I think, in his 50s, but he lived hard. I should have tried harder. I didn't, and he died unexpectedly, but it's always unexpected. Glenn O'Brien, the style guy, he would have been perfect. And we had initial correspondence in 2015, and we had two mutual pals. And I could have pushed, and I didn't push. And he died earlier this year. And there are a few others I hadn't even yet reached out to, like James Salter and Jimmy Breslin, older guys and legendary figures, and they probably would have said no, but I didn't try. And they're gone. And sometimes a failure works out. I was too late for the cartoonist Richard Thompson. I was a huge fan of his work, but He was already struck by Parkinson's. I was hoping to get him before it got too far, but it got too far. And because he was a saint, he felt bad about not being able to connect with me. And he set me up with his friend, Matt Worker, who's a great political cartoonist. And he was the reigning Pulitzer Prize winner that year. Matt was a great guest, and we reconnected this fall to record another segment. And that's where he introduced me to a book that's just rewired my brain. I mentioned it last week in the guest list. It's a book called The Peregrine by J.A. Baker. That's what I mean. Worker wasn't even on my radar. Richard, who I wanted to record with, was too sick, but sometimes it works out. Sometimes it doesn't. I've had a few guests where I have gotten to them a little too late. I'm not going to name names. But sometimes they're on their decline already, and maybe they don't know it. Maybe they just want one more chance to talk or to tell their stories. But I know it's not as good as it could have been 5 or 10 years ago in their lives. Some people have had to turn me down because they know. I had one guest who told me I'm going through the stages of Parkinson's now, and my speech is not good enough, and I do not want to go on the air and talk. And you want to know something embarrassing? I have not followed up with Al Jaffe. That guy's going to turn 97 in March, and we met and talked last spring. His wife told me when I followed up by email that summer to get back to them in September. But I was too busy with work. I was putting on a conference. I had travel. I had all the stuff to do. I had enough shows backed up that I didn't have that imperative. Holy crap, I put off getting back to a 96-year-old legend. How long is that guy going to be around? He's probably going to outlive all of us, don't get me wrong, but I should be putting him off. I'm going to write him right after I post this episode. I'm going to write and say, when can we get together? Whatever's convenient for you, let's sit down and talk. Arnold Roth, too. I met him last spring, early summer. We made some noises. I didn't follow up enough, and that guy's not going to be around forever either. To get back to my point, I'm very sad that Anthea's gone, that her mind is gone. She's still there, but she's not Anthea, at least according to her son. But I'm also glad that I got to experience just a little bit of the light that she shines on the world. I've gotten to read her translations over the years, but I also got to sit down with her as a person and talk with her about her life and learn a little bit of who she is. And as her son wrote in that one paragraph, and trust me, that's all he talks about it in the column. It's really all about asterisks and learning language, and he doesn't dwell on his mother. But as he writes in that one paragraph, I'm not downcast. Though her career is over, she remains a literary giant, and no one has taught me more about language and languages. So let's celebrate. It's Christmas, New Year's is coming. Let's celebrate what's there. I will continue in 2018, and I hope beyond, to seek out a pretty broad range of guests who you can't cohere into any real mission, but it's all people I want to sit down with. And I will do my best to get some of the at-risk ones lined up, some of the older guests who might not be around in another couple of years, in the hopes that they still got it. And I hope you'll be back to listen. So have a great Christmas, great New Year, and an amazing 2018. And that is it for this year-end mini episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Our music, as usual, is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. I'll be back in a week. It will be the first week of January. That'll be our 250th episode. You'll have to wait until then to find out who the guest is. Now, the Virtual Memories Show is all about keeping literary culture alive. So if you'd like to become a supporter of the podcast, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and set up a recurring or one-time donation. That'll get you access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, as well as patron-only blog posts, postcards of our past guests, handwritten show notes for every episode, something special that I'm working on, and more. You'll find out if you donate. If you want to help defray some of the costs of the show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, and coffee, or if you just want to toss me some money because you think the show's worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. This one didn't cost anything. Just a guy sitting in his library talking into a microphone. That said, the microphone, the mixing board, the cables, everything else did cost some money. So give me a hand if you want. A special thanks go out to Kevin Katila, John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Stephen Nadler, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Noah Van Sciver, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, Jack Lescamella, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We have the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. And you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories show and download past episodes at the iTunes store. You can also find all our episodes, get our RSS feed, and get on our email list at either of our websites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com. You can also follow the Virtual Memories show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at facebook.com/Virtual Memories show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube by searching for Virtual Memories show. And if you like this podcast, again, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories show, and leave a rating and review for us. It'll help us build a bigger audience. And tell other people about it. Till next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.